What science just discovered about narcissists will leave you speechless. Brace yourself for what might be one of the most shocking revelations about narcissism. Science has acknowledged a demonic side to it. Yes, you heard that right. You might think this means narcissism will finally be exposed for what it truly is. But hold on, because the truth is far from that. In fact, this disorder doesn't target the narcissist at all. It's aimed at you. Ever heard of something called demon face syndrome? That's the simple term for it. But clinically, it's referred to as prosopometamorphopsia. When you first hear demon face syndrome, you might assume it's going to explain why a narcissist's face seems to morph into something sinister when they're in a rage or when the relationship is crumbling. I know I did. But after diving into the research, I was stunned to discover that this disorder isn't about them. It's about you. Turns out, it's not the narcissist who's being labeled as disturbed. It's actually you who gets slapped with the crazy label. Let's dive into why that is. If you visit a therapist or counselor unfamiliar with narcissistic abuse and tell them, "Doctor, towards the end of my relationship, I saw an evil face in my spouse or partner. What was that? Am I losing my mind?" The response won't be, "No, you're not imagining things. That's who they really are." Instead, they'll likely diagnose you with something like demon face syndrome. They might say you have a psychological disorder, are experiencing delusions, or are going through a psychotic break. Isn't that the epitome of victim blaming? You and I both recognize the darker, sinister side of narcissism. It's not just our experiences. Countless others have encountered the same phenomenon. How can so many survivors of narcissistic abuse be wrong or have the same disorder? These individuals aren't from random backgrounds. They're victims of a very specific form of manipulation and mistreatment. So how can this be dismissed as false? When I first heard about this so-called disorder, I was concerned. Why? Because I know what happens in clinical environments. Survivors of narcissistic abuse will be ignored, branded as unstable, or accused of fabricating their experiences. But what about the things I've witnessed? What about the testimonies of others? Are they also supposed to be crazy? This will only deepen the isolation of survivors, which is a tragic outcome. I started to understand the underlying reason behind this dismissal. I kept asking myself, why is there no deeper investigation? The truth is, there's an agenda to downplay the reality of narcissistic abuse and to suppress awareness. Nowadays, everyone is becoming more familiar with terms like narcissist, and that's exactly what certain powers don't want. And you know who I mean by they. I can't say more on that. The trend of classifying common human behaviors and conditions as disorders has gained momentum over time. If you dig into the history behind the DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, you'll notice that many conditions considered disorders a decade or two ago are no longer viewed the same way. Take, for example, autism spectrum disorder. Once categorized as a mental illness, it's now understood as neurodivergence, simply a different way of experiencing and engaging with the world. The same idea applies to what some call demon face syndrome. It's not a mental illness, but rather a genuine occurrence. Rather than conducting more thorough research to grasp the intricacies, those in authority chose the easy route, slap a label on it, and in turn, further traumatize the survivors. This might come as a shock, but numerous survivors of narcissistic abuse are often misdiagnosed in therapy with borderline personality disorder, BPD. Why? Because they exhibit high sensitivity to rejection, emotional instability, confusion, and behaviors that don't fit neatly into the clinician's understanding. The result? Another misapplied diagnosis, PPE. However, one ironic benefit from the demon face syndrome label could be validation. As strange as it sounds, at least it's some acknowledgement that yes, those lifeless, predatory eyes you witnessed are real. Yes, you've seen the reptilian-like aspects of these people. While they won't admit it's real in the traditional sense, they are conceding that people can sometimes perceive beyond the surface of the person they're dealing with. It's a tiny victory, but a victory nonetheless. So you can take comfort in knowing that what you saw was real. This should give you peace of mind, affirming that you made the right decision by walking away from someone lacking a soul. And to those who argue, claiming narcissism has a demonic element absolves them of responsibility. That's simply not the case. No one is suggesting they aren't accountable. The truth is, dark forces may influence their actions. But it's the narcissist who repeatedly chooses the path of destruction. Through their choices, they open themselves to those malevolent forces. Neuroscience tells us that as long as your prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for making decisions, managing emotions, and controlling impulses, is functioning, transformation is possible. This applies to everyone, including narcissists. They don't just react impulsively, they make the conscious decision to behave in certain ways because it benefits them. Their choice to lash out, manipulate, or display rage is deliberate, as it helps them get what they desire. Narcissists repeatedly take the path of least resistance, which contributes to their dark, almost sinister nature. When someone consistently aligns themselves with negative or malevolent forces, they eventually embody those forces. In extreme cases, they can no longer hide it, and it starts to manifest physically. They may become unhinged, their faces distort, and you see their true essence. So, what's your take on demon face syndrome? How do you think it impacts people? I'd love to hear your thoughts and any personal experiences you might have. Drop them in the comments below. Thinking back to my own life, this topic reminds me of my grandfather. He used to talk loudly to himself, like he was having a full conversation with someone who wasn't there. He'd even laugh. To outsiders, it might have seemed like some mental health issue, but I knew better. I knew he was involved in dark practices. How? Well, as I've mentioned before, he openly shared with me how he used spells to break couples apart. He showed me the exact process, the words, the materials, everything. I never performed them, but he taught me. Once I started talking about what he'd shown me, exposing his secret, he cut me off completely. Wouldn't even look in my direction. My family had their suspicions about him, but I had seen and heard too much to ignore. To make it even stranger, his house was known to be haunted by dark entities. While part of me wanted to dismiss it all, I couldn't ignore what I had witnessed. I'll save that story for another day. But the truth is, these dark presences are real. Learning about spirits like Leviathan and Jezebel connected the dots for me. Even though these names come from Christian teachings, the common thread is evil. And I truly believe narcissists open themselves up to these forces. With that said, I want to thank you for staying with me through this episode. If you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here or haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Also, feel free to share this video with someone who might need to hear this message. I appreciate you all, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Until then, keep healing, stay strong, and never stop seeking the truth.